On this episode of China Uncensored, the future of the internet is peace and security, run by the world's biggest violator of human rights. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Nothing makes me feel hopeful about the future of mankind like a new world order run by the benevolent Chinese Communist Party. But that's a long way off. We may just have to accept China's new world order in cyberspace for now. Last week, this policy paper called International Strategy of Cooperation on Cyberspace was issued by China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Cyberspace Administration of China. Among other things, the paper calls for upholding sovereignty in cyberspace. Basically, it means the Chinese regime wants cyberspace to be viewed in the same way it treats China's land, air, and seas. Can you build artificial islands in cyberspace? Don't worry, they only want to do benevolent New World Order stuff, like prevent cyberspace from becoming a new battlefield. Nice try, China. Cyberspace is already a battlefield. That's what I learned from my favorite 90s live-action kids show, adapted using stock footage from Japanese television. Superhuman Samurai! What? Like you didn't watch Superhuman Samurai Cybersquad. Yes, cyberspace is crawling with monster viruses that are knocking down lots of things. The Chinese Communist Party wants to pretend it's Servo, our cyber hero. But don't be fooled. It was KiloCon all along. Anyway, like KiloCon, what the Communist Party wants is not just control of its own domain, but the entire world. Last week's latest policy paper essentially lays out that plan, but in warm, fuzzy language. It mentions peace 18 times in 12 pages. I mean, did you know that China has been a force for world peace, advocates the principles of peace, and is committed to upholding peace and security in cyberspace? And if they say it often enough, it must be true. And last Thursday, an official from the Cyberspace Administration of China told reporters that the Chinese internet is fully open and that all internet companies are welcome in China. Did you hear that, Google? Oh, wait. As long as they comply with Chinese laws and regulations, refrain from undermining China's national interests and interests of Chinese consumers. Never mind, Google. The fact is, China's internet freedom ranking is just below Iran and Syria. So not super free. The Chinese Communist Party maintains a tight grip on the internet with what's known as the Great Firewall, a massive nationwide censorship and monitoring system. The regime claims it's necessary for national security. In other words, cracking down on dissent. Fortunately, last week's policy paper doesn't have any power to let the Chinese regime control the world's internet. It's just something they're going to present at the BRICS Economic Summit later this year. Unfortunately, this policy paper won't be the end of it, and it's not the beginning either. For many years, the Chinese regime has been working towards grabbing more control of the world's internet. In an episode last October, I told you about how China is trying to influence ICANN, the world's internet address book. So why does the Chinese Communist Party care so much about controlling the internet in the rest of the world? No, the endgame is not about censoring Americans from searching for topics banned on the Chinese internet, like the Tiananmen Square massacre. A key part of it actually has to do with economics. The Chinese regime can only do so much with its draconian internet security laws and tons of secret police. To maintain power, it has to keep the Chinese middle class happy with economic incentives. So to keep the economy running, the Chinese regime has invented a vast system of economic espionage to steal other countries, and particularly America's, innovation and intellectual property. U.S. companies and the U.S. economy lose approximately $5 trillion each year, or over 30% of the U.S. GDP, when you factor the full value of the stolen innovation. So in 2015, then President Barack Obama sat down with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and they agreed. No more economic cyber theft. Other forms of hacking were still okay. That's not a joke. But a big chunk of the Chinese economy, and by extension the rule of the Chinese regime, depends on stolen innovation. So what are you going to do? Simply find legal ways to do the same thing. This is when you start to see China rolling out all kinds of cybersecurity laws for national security. Laws very similar to what China now wants to roll out globally. In July 2015, China passed the National Security Law to make all key network infrastructure and information systems secure and controllable. Later that year, the counterterrorism law was passed that requires internet service providers to help authorities decrypt data and provide technical means of support in terrorism cases. And at the end of 2016, the cybersecurity law was passed. It requires that network operators must accept government supervision. According to Forbes, it could theoretically cover every organization or business with a linked computer system. And companies around the world freaked. Because basically, what that all meant is the Chinese regime can look at anything that happens on a computer inside China, including the computers of Western companies operating in China, or even Western companies that don't operate in China, but use servers inside China. And it's done under the guise of national security and counterterrorism. Essentially, if the Chinese regime requires companies to give it access to any and all data passing through China, this is a legal way to get a hold of foreign intellectual property. Of course, many companies tried to rebel, and the Chinese regime hit back hard. Companies like Microsoft, Qualcomm, and Apple were hit with surprise early morning raids of their China offices, fines, heavy criticism in the media, the whole shebang. And then they mostly backed down and gave in to the idea of following Chinese law. Because who doesn't want a piece of that magically delicious China market? And that's just one example of how the Chinese Communist Party is trying to influence internet policy. This latest proposal is really just a small step in a much larger plan that's been going on for years. And the endgame, as always, is maintaining the party's control over China. That blasted KiloCon trying to rule the internet. Speaking of which, where's my gritty reboot of Superhuman Samurai Cybersquad? Get on it, Hollywood. I mean, it's not like Matthew Lawrence is doing anything right now. So what do you think of the Chinese regime's plans for your internet? Leave your comments below, while you still can. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Now go out there and kick some gigabutt.
Superhuman samurai. Superhuman samurai. They're gonna amp it up. Kick some gigabutt.